Today, I'm really going to talk about libraries, 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 libraries. And please, when you're going home, think about libraries. Do you have the handout? Okay, good. If not, too bad. No, if not, raise your hand, see if we can get them to you. Okay, are there handouts in the back? Handout. Good, thanks, Sophie. All right. Oh, at the top of the handout is my contribution to your economic condition, saving money. There's my website on the top, www.sdkrashen.com. Download things, it's all for free. And our journal, I've mentioned this before, the International Journal of Foreign Language Teaching, where you can find all kinds of free, short, comprehensible articles. The case for a library is based on 3 steps, and I'm going to talk about each step. Number 1, more access to books means more reading. Most people in the United States don't believe this, but we have very good evidence that it's true. More access to books, more reading. Number 2, more reading means more literacy development. Not more exercises, not more phonics, more real reading, reading for pleasure. Now, if this is true, we go to step 3. More access to books means more literacy development. And where do we get books? For many people in the world today, it's the library. Someone said that the New York City Library was the poor person's university, right? Well, let's do step 1. Is it true that more access to books means more reading? Absolutely. I wrote a book about this a few years ago called The Power of Reading. My mother said that that was the best book that I wrote because it was the one she really understood. She said it was the second best book she had read about education. Not the first best. My mother was perfect. Absolutely wonderful. I owe so much to my mother. And she read the Read Aloud Handbook by Jim Trelease, and she said to me, "Stephen, why can't you write like this?" And I said, I wish I could. So better than my book, read the Read Aloud Handbook by Jim Trelease. It's very good. It talks about me, it talks about Dr. Kyung-Sik Cho, talks about our work. Anyway, it's a wonderful book. Anyway, in that book, in The Power of Reading, I have a lot of research on there. I have a whole chapter on access to books and how to get people to read. And here's what it says. More books in the home means more pleasure reading. More books in the classroom library means more pleasure reading. More books in the school library means more pleasure reading. More books in public library means more pleasure reading. And I'm going to tell you about one of many, many, many studies that I talk about in the book, Hulme Marquette, which is a study done in Canada. They found that in school libraries, if you increase the supply of books 20%, this increases circulation by 10%. A very direct relationship. I think that's extremely encouraging. If you increase the hours that the library is open, this is a great question to ask. It increases circulation 17% in high school. Only 3% in elementary school. That makes sense. Elementary school children don't have the independence to go to the library at funny hours, okay, before school, during school, after school. So this makes sense. Well, the reason people don't really believe this is because they have the illusion that people don't like to read. I'm going to expand on some comments I made yesterday. I've written several papers on this about the fact that children really do like to read. Informal evidence is better than the statistics. I have heard this story again and again, and the public doesn't know about it. The teacher brings in a box of new books to the classroom, the elementary school classroom. The moment the box is delivered, before they're open, the children crowd around. They want to see what the new books are. They're eager to see them. They love reading. People still like to read. The chart you have here I'm getting very good at Excel. Have you noticed? I got these nice charts. Anyway, this is my Excel chart here from an article I'm still trying to get published, and I mentioned it briefly yesterday. This is a survey of how much people read. Are kids really reading today? The title of my article was "Stop Scolding Teenagers," because we're always anti-teenager. The kids these days, have no respect. They don't read. Kids aren't reading these days. Look at this. Look at the column that says book reading. This is one way of measuring it. The number of minutes per day done by different surveys. 1946, teenagers were reading books 22 minutes a day. Today, 1910, 21 minutes a day. That's not a serious decline. That's identical. Look at the problem here, magazines and newspapers. Yes, that has gone down. No question. It's gone down for every age group, for adults, everybody. But look at the next column, websites. 16 minutes a day. And when you add website reading to book reading, students today, teenagers today, are reading about the same as they have ever read. All right? And this is possibly an underestimate of everything they do. Okay, so literacy is not in decline. It is true, the more access to books there is, the more reading, and probably, as I mentioned in one of the seminars yesterday, maybe the internet is going to turn out to be a very good friend of literacy. Well, is it true more reading leads to more literacy development? Oh, yes. In the keynote talk in the morning, I talked to you about multivariate studies, the multiple regressions that my colleagues have done and others have done. So I'll leave that alone. I'll just refer back to it. This definitely shows reading is a consistent winner in all these studies. Let's look at another category. I have two more areas of research here. One is the research on sustained silent reading, SSR. Sustained silent reading, most of you have heard about. You take about 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes off of the school day. The children, the teenagers, the students read. The students read whatever they want to read. So they can read Choose Your Own Adventure, they can read Twilight, they can read Harry Potter. Most of them choose Steve Krashen, The Power of Reading. No, they don't. No, they don't. And they can read what they want to read, and the teacher reads whatever the teacher wants to read. Isn't that wonderful? We have to find out if this works. I have calculated, if you do 10 minutes a day of sustained silent reading with one of your classes, once a day, over a normal teaching career, this amounts to 3 months paid vacation. Are you with me? Teaching is hard. Let's give teachers a little bit of a break, okay? Well, I've looked at the research on sustained silent reading. I've been spending a lot of my waking hours looking at sustained silent reading since the middle 1980s. And oh my, does it work. What I'd like to do is show you one study in detail, then give you a survey of studies. A study I think really deserves our praise and attention is the one in the middle of page 1. This is the Fiji Island study. And the man in charge of this is one of my heroes in the profession, Warwick Ellie, who from New Zealand, who has really been a pioneer. And it's important I tell you a little bit about Warwick Ellie and his status in the field. This is an important thing to know. Warwick Ellie is a retired professor, senior scholar, very well respected by everybody, no matter what, if you're in the profession of reading education, all right? You go to reading conferences and you say, Warwick Ellie, and people say, oh yeah, he's okay. Warwick Ellie has served the profession very well. He's been the president of this, the director of this, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a well-respected scholar. In 1983, Warwick Ellie published a paper in the Reading Research Quarterly. The Reading Research Quarterly, if you know the reading journals, the Reading Research Quarterly is the #1 snob journal in the field of literacy education. It's the flagship journal of the International Reading Association, and all the articles in the Reading Research Quarterly, nearly all of them are long, complicated, and nearly completely incomprehensible. So everyone thinks this must be the best journal in the field. I think the only people who can read these papers are people who've meditated for several years and have monk-like powers of deep concentration. Oh my gosh, I try to read it, I really do, and I usually get through it, but it's not easy, okay? You know, when I need several cups of coffee to get through any of these papers. That's where this came out, this paper. It was done in the Fiji Islands. In the Fiji, with Ellie and his colleague Francis Mangubhai, whom I also know quite well. He spent a week with us in USC about 15 years ago. It was wonderful. We learned a great deal from him. Anyway, done in the Fiji Islands, English is a foreign language. The children were divided into 3 groups. One group got the audiolingual method. Most of you remember this. This is a combination of everything that's wrong in language teaching combined into one method. So repetition, drill, grammar, correction, all this heavy testing, etc. It's also still the most popular method in the world today. The second group was sustained silent reading. Here are the books boys and girls enjoy. The third method was called shared reading. In North America, we know this as big books. The kids are read to from big books. They follow the story, and they do self-selected reading. This was done in the 4th and 5th grade. Children in the Fiji Islands start English at kindergarten, 30 minutes a day. So by the time they're in the 4th grade, they can pretty well understand these books. They went out of their way to find very interesting books. Before I give you the results, let me review what we've got here. We've got Warwick Ellie, well-respected senior scholar. We've got the Reading Research Quarterly. This is like the New England Journal of Medicine. This is like Nature, the most well-respected science journal in the world. This is not the local newsletter of the Communist Party, all right? This is mainstream, well-respected stuff. This is where it appeared, and it's got data, statistics, and standardized tests. Everything the harshest critic would ever want in a study. Okay, Ellie and Mangubhai presented the results in terms of months gained on standardized tests. We expect native speakers to gain 10 months in a year. Let's see how these people did. These children, 4th graders, audiolingual, 6.5 months gained. Now, take a deep breath. Sustained silent reading, 4th graders. Look at this, 15 months gained. We should draw a circle around that in red, okay? I didn't make this up. This is from the journal paper, not even close. Big books, 15 months gained. 5th graders, audiolingual, a pathetic 2.5 months gained. Sustained silent reading, a modest but respectable 9. Big books, 15. The second year of the project, the 9 disappeared. It was also 15. It was equal. Rather, the 2 groups were equal. And they were farther ahead of the audiolingual group. They were better in listening, writing, reading, grammar, etc. In 1991, I think that should have settled it right there. This study was it, in my opinion. But in 1991, Warwick Ellie published another paper, another study. I call this one the Singapore study. Very similar gains. It was published in a journal called Language Learning, considered one of the top journals in the world in second language acquisition. So this was in very public places. The results were nearly as impressive. They were very strong from the Singapore study. The interesting thing about the Singapore paper was that Ellie had a long section in a discussion of what some of the reactions were from the adults connected to the program, from teachers, parents, administrators. There were 2 major concerns. Concern number 1, the major concern everybody has, good reason. The children are reading, but how will they do on the tests? Look at the data. They do fine on the test. They do better on the tests than children who do skill building. They do better on the tests than children who do grammar exercises and test preparation. They do better on grammar tests than students who study grammar. Now, why do they do better? I think it's because they can't help it. If you read a lot, the conventions of language, the grammar, the punctuation, all that, the spelling, it's acquired, it's absorbed. It becomes part of you. It's deep, stored deep in your central nervous system. You have no choice but to write well. Let's say there are 211 people in the room. I just made that up. And let's say I asked you all to write something. Don't worry, I won't. But let's say I asked everybody to write, 2 paragraphs. And then we traded papers. There would be 211 good papers. There wouldn't be a bad one in the room, I promise you. You know why? Because you've read so much, you have no choice. When you write, everything comes out okay. You have no choice, it's automatic. You cannot write poorly, you don't even know how. The only way you can write poorly is if you've just read a pile of student papers. That shows the influence of reading, okay? You go to someone's house, there are books everywhere. You would be amazed to see a sample of their writing with serious mistakes. It's extremely rare. The other problem people have with this is they say things like, the children in the reading group seem to be having a good time. Well, we can't have that. We're now living in an age of tough love. It has to be difficult. No, it isn't. If you're looking for pain and suffering, you've come to the wrong place. People in spirituality talk about the path of pleasure and the path of pain. And the path of pleasure in spirituality with meditation, etc., is very nice, but it's slow. And the path of pain, oh my gosh, it's very quick. If you go to workshops and the leader asks people, why did you come? Why are you having a spiritual crisis? And it's, why do you want this education? It's usually because of some tragedy. Something horrible has happened. You've woken up. What is the meaning of life? Not so in literacy development. In literacy development, there is only the path of pleasure. Let me state this conservatively. I am not saying everything pleasant is good for you. I'm not saying if it feels good, it's good for you. We said that in the 60s. Sometimes it was true, sometimes it wasn't. We had a lot of fun finding out, but still. What I'm saying is more conservative. If it's good for you, it should feel good in literacy development. Students and teachers will enjoy it. If it's painful, something is seriously wrong. Well, my triumph of Excel is the next chart here. I wrote a paper in 2007, and I'm happy to say the paper is already very obsolete because new evidence has come and I need to update it. This is a study of high school and university level only, English as a foreign language, not in English-speaking countries, not ESL, but EFL. And I thought this was a good laboratory because many, many students in EFL, the class is the only place they have to get English. Okay, so this is a good place to look at it. The first column here are the studies, and in every study there was a comparison group with traditional instruction, and there was an experimental group where there was some sustained silent reading, some free voluntary reading. Look down at the last two columns and you'll see the results of each study. Two kinds of tests, closed test and reading comprehension test. The ES means effect size, and here's today's statistics lesson if you don't know what this is. If the effect size is positive, if the number is positive, it means the readers did better. The readers are better in every single study. In other words, it worked in every single one. An effect size of about 0.2 is a low effect size. 0.5, 0.6 is modest. 7, 8, 9 is pretty good. Now, for those of you, for both of you who remember statistics, I'll tell you what this really means. The rest of you can, take some time off for the next 10 seconds. An effect size of 1.0 means the students in one group were one standard deviation better than the students in the other group. So the average effect size was anywhere from 0.4 to 0.7, depending on how I did the calculation. So this is pretty robust and pretty strong for short duration treatment. Well, that gives you a very quick look at the worldwide studies. Let's look at Korea, and here is Dr. Kyung-Suk Cho in the first row, my colleague here. And these are Korean studies done with children, and I'm very happy to say they're all short papers and easy to read. That makes them harder to write, but they're easy to read. And these are all studies with children here in EFL, and again, 3 studies, 3 consistent results. In one study, the children in EFL class took time off, read from the internet, only 14 weeks. That's a very short duration. And it was a positive study. They did better on reading tests. Second study, they did reading of newspapers, and the one I think is the most impressive about this is they did more voluntary reading of the papers in their free time, which is what we're really interested in. The third study combined hearing stories, storytelling, read-alouds with free voluntary reading, and we see very, very nice gains and more voluntary use of the library. And these kinds of results are probably the most important, because we're not just interested in the gains after 10 weeks, 2 months. We're interested in lifetime. Does this lead to a reading habit? Well, I like supplementing this with case histories. I regard case histories as very important and scientifically valid, because in most of the case histories, the ones I'm going to show you, the threats to validity have been met. They've been eliminated. There is no other explanation except reading. In these 3 cases, we have people who were basically brought up in reasonably high poverty situations where there weren't a lot of books around, but they managed to get a reading habit. And they all became highly literate, and they give reading the credit. The first one I find absolutely delicious. Geoffrey Canada was the hero of a film that just came out in the United States about education called Waiting for Superman. And he's the founder of the Harlem Children's Zone and has a very tough love attitude towards schooling. Data, testing, hard work. That's not the way he did it. He published an autobiography about 5 years ago about growing up with violence all around. There were 2 versions. There was a prose version and a graphic novel version. I, of course, read the graphic novel version. And it's very, very good. He grew up in New York City, lots of poverty, tough time, how it was to survive. About 2/3 through the book, he says this: "I loved reading, and my mother, who read voraciously too, allowed me to have novels after she finished them. My strong reading background allowed me to have an easier time of it in most of my classes. His best friend was a reader. They found books and always traded. The Harlem Children's Zone schools, their worst performance on tests is on reading. That's where they're having the most trouble. I've written them. I've tried hard to find out, how are your libraries? No response, okay? The second one is a similar case. Liz Murray's an author of a book that came out last year called Breaking Night. Grew up in very high poverty in New York, and she said what she did is reading, of course, saved the day for her. Her father had this very interesting habit or strategy. In those days in New York City, the local public libraries weren't connected by computer. Each one was independent. So her dad would go to one local library, take out all the books he could, and never return them. Then he went to another local library, got a library card, took out all the books he could, and never returned them. So the house was filled with fugitive library books from all over the city of New York, okay? Now, what Liz did is she read her dad's books, and what she did was she would only go to school 2 or 3 weeks before the end of the semester in elementary school, just enough to find out what the examinations would be. Here's her quote: "Any formal education I received came from the few days I spent in attendance in school. mixed with knowledge I absorb from random readings of my or Daddy's ever-growing supply of unreturned library books. As long as I still showed up steadily the last few weeks of classes to take the standardized test, I kept squeaking by from grade to grade. Wow, again, same thing here, and these are one of many. Richard Wright's another example. Richard Wright is a wonderful author. His best-known book is his autobiography called Black Boy, which is about growing up in the segregated South. He said he grew up in an environment where reading and writing was actually disapproved of. His grandmother did not approve of fiction. When a boarder lived at the home, a school teacher, she read stories to Richard. When Grandma found out, she asked her to leave. He got a newspaper route only so he could read the newspaper. He finally got access to books, lots of books, by borrowing a library card from a white friend of his, and took books from the library pretending he was doing it for his friend, but of course he was reading the books. And he speculates about how he became a writer. Here's his quote. I wanted to write and I did not even know the English language, the literary language. I bought English grammars and found them dull. Are there any questions? I felt I was getting a better sense of the language from novels than from grammars. Who are you going to believe? People who haven't ever done it, or a true master who really has done it and really knows how? Well, this is part of the case. I've made this first part of the case, and that is more access to books mean more reading, and more reading means, second part is more literacy development. Let's look at the impact of libraries. We have independent, I've given you the indirect case, this is a very good direct case. There has been an explosion of research on libraries in the United States, and one person is the hero here. His name is Keith Curry Lance. Your homework assignment is to go to Google and type in Keith Curry Lance, another great hero and our friend. I hereby pronounce Keith Lance to be our BFF. Best friend forever, right? Keith Lance worked for many years in Colorado, in the state of Colorado, and in the 1990s he was given this assignment. Is literacy a problem we should throw money at? The answer, yes. But we have to aim very carefully. He found for elementary schools in Colorado, the amount of money put in the school did not relate to the level of reading. But if you consider the library in the equation, then you see it. He used a technique, a multivariate technique called path analysis. Found, look at books, money put in the library, then from the library to the reading score, very strong. He found out it works when you control for money in the school, when you control for computers, in most cases, even when you control for poverty, and poverty overwhelms everything in these studies. He's continuing his work, and it's all one of the reasons, again, another reason why he's such a hero, is that all his work is available on the internet. You type in Keith Curry Lance, you can download everything with his blessing and see what he's up to. He also isolated the factors in many of his studies. He found the number of books in the library was a factor. The presence of a certified librarian, an independent factor. His recent study, in fact, published last month, showed that when you fire librarians, reading scores go down. And that's what people are doing all the time. Number 3, help for the librarian, extra staffing. These are the things that independently count. Jeff McQuillan, my former student, has demonstrated this also at the national level. States with better school libraries get better scores, again, even controlling for poverty on national tests. Our most recent study in this, and this, I think this is about as important as any study I've ever been involved with. This was published just last year, and this was done in virtual collaboration through the electronics with my 2 former students, Seeing Lee from Taiwan, and here's Jeff McQuillan again, coming back to work with us. We looked at performance on the Pearls examination. Now, the Pearls examination is an international test given to 10-year-olds in 40 countries. You take the test in your own language, and they do all this statistical magic to make sure that the tests are more or less equivalent difficulty. Now, when the Pearls results come out, and this is every 3 years or so, the newspapers love it. They always want to know which country won, which country lost. Another person I admire, Alfie Kohn, says the testing results should go in the sports section. Okay, so they're always interested in winners and losers and all that. And you know, there's always these things. Did Germany beat France? Did Korea beat Japan? You know, this is always like this. And when I look at the headlines in the media, every single country in the world except Finland declares they have a literacy crisis. Because you lost, you got to come in first, or it's no good. Finland always wins, all these things all the time. So we didn't do that. We ignored that. Instead, we did a multivariate study. And here's our multiple regression, which you learned about yesterday, to see which of the factors was the strongest. Now, this pretends that the factors are independent. They don't influence each other, again, thanks to mathematical magic. Let's look at the factors involved. And oh boy, is this a big one. SES, poverty. This one actually should have a minus. The higher the level of poverty, the lower the score. And you look here, you see the beta is the highest of everything, 0.42. That was the strongest factor, and you see this in all studies. The next factor was the percentage of children in each country who have access to a sustained silent reading program in school, who are allowed to do from reading in school. It was positive, not as strong as poverty, but it had a modest effect. And now, the big one, library. The percentage of children in each country who have access to a library of 500 books or more. Positive, nearly as strong as the effects of poverty. Look at the betas, 0.43, 0.34. What this suggests is that a good library can make up, mitigate, balance the effects of poverty, at least on reading. This is big. The next one was the amount of time spent in instruction in reading, negative. The more instruction, the worse. Well, before we get too excited about this, it could be because kids who are lower in reading are given more instruction. Okay. I suspect that it's real. And I suspect that if you did a graph, you did a curve, it would come out like this. From no instruction to a little bit, probably positive. Like in reading, that's basic phonics, the alphabet, etc. After that, diminishing returns. Now down below, you see a number that says r squared equals 0.63. What this means is this. If you go to a country and you know the level of poverty, you know what the percentage of children are getting sustained silent reading, you know the effects of the library, you know about libraries, and you know how much instruction, that's 63% of the information you need to predict their reading score. For educational research, this is X-Files. This is science fiction. You don't get R squared this high. Now, usually in educational research, if we get R squared of 0.15, R squared 0.12, if we can explain 20%, we're very happy because there's so many confounding variables. Well, we thought this was too good to be true. We're probably doing something wrong. And then Doug Achterman, we discovered Doug Achterman's dissertation. This was done a few years before our study. It was done only in California. For high school students, he found exactly what we did. He found that poverty played a role. He found that the effect of the library was just as strong as the effect of poverty. It was the same in his study. And school factors hardly mattered at all once you considered poverty and access to books. His R squared was 0.57. Since this came out, we've discovered other international studies that look at access to books at home. Access to books at home balances the effects of poverty, okay? By the way, if you'd like to see the date on this, on my website is an article that summarizes all this research. As you see, it's called Protecting Students, etc. Well, my sermon at the end of all this, for some reason, we are still highly allergic to considering libraries and free reading. We see signs of activity, signs of hope here and there that some people are paying attention, but it's still not paid much attention to. I'm going to whine for a few minutes, and you're going to listen to it. You'll be my therapy group for a few minutes. I'll give you some instances of this that really are sad. An article came out by Fryer and Levitt. Now, Levitt is one of the authors of a book called Freakonomics, and he's gotten a lot of variety. He has a blog in the New York Times and all this. And, I like Freakonomics, but I think he blew it in several areas, and I wrote him. I said, you got this wrong, you got this wrong. He said, thank you very much, and then ignored it for the next edition. In one of the articles, though, this is an independent thing, that they used as background, they decided to look at the difference between African American and white children on tests given in entering kindergarten. Well, first of all, giving kindergarten children tests right away is wrong, in my opinion. I mean, let's start right there. That's a pretty dumb thing to do. These are kids who can hardly find the bathroom and tie their shoes, and we're giving them tests. Okay. So they gave them these tests on math and on literacy, and they found that the white kids were way up here and the African American kids were down here. Typical finding. Then they looked at poverty. That closed 2/3 of the gap right there. They then added access to books. Not only did that close the gap, but the African American kids were slightly better. It's not statistically significant. The thing I find the most amazing is that these authors ignored that result. They said it in their paper. It's a very long paper. Said, oh, here's the result. Oh, yeah, well, I guess if you have books and you take care of poverty, that closes the gap. How about that? Then they went on to their next topic and never referred to it again. I think this is earth-shaking for many, many, many reasons. Another thing that just happened about how this stuff gets buried all the time, an article came out in a journal I really like called Reading in a Foreign Language. You should pay attention to reading in a foreign language. It's free. Isn't that cool? It's a good academic journal, and it's free. It's right there on the internet. So just type in reading in a foreign language, and you'll find it. Anyway, an article came out, a very good article, Helliker. Long, one of these papers that goes on for months and months. And by the time you're at the end, you forget what the paper was about in the beginning. You're not the only ones. This happens too. I complain about this. Buried in the article, you got to look hard because I missed it. He looks at the predictors of the ability to read and understand academic texts among Norwegian university students. What were the factors? Reading ability in the first language. The better you read in the first language, the better you read in the second, which Jim Cummins has demonstrated again and again, foundation of bilingual education. Taking extra English classes didn't matter. The more you read, the more you paid attention to English media, small effect. The winner, ladies and gentlemen, free voluntary reading, by far the highest correlation. He also mentioned in passing that these Norwegian university students don't read very much. So there probably was what we call a weakened or attenuated correlation, which might be even stronger. Only half in their lifetime had read 16 or more novels. Most of you read that many in the last 2 months, I know. Only 18% had read 51 or more novels in English. So we have the evidence that this works again and again. The American media is willing to consider anything except reading. There have been articles in USA Today and the Washington Post about, are you ready for this? Reading aloud to dogs. They're serious. They think this is the breakthrough. What you want is a friendly dog. I guess a non-friendly dog is a cat. I don't know. Okay. And these dogs have to be specially trained. Soon they'll have tests for them too. And the only evidence they have that this works, in one of the articles, they said, oh, we know this works, it's wonderful. One parent said, it's terrific, because when my little boy came home, he started reading to the family dog. Okay, I have nothing against reading to dogs. So you want to do that? In fact, another article said, no, it's parrots. You got to read to your parrot. Okay, this is the debate. No evidence for any of this stuff. There's absolutely no evidence for any of it. If you want to do it, go ahead. But don't claim in the front page of USA Today that this is a breakthrough, that this is a wonderful thing. And there's no mention of books. Other articles that have been in the media, chess. We want kids to play chess. You know, the state of Idaho is instituting chess as a required subject for third graders because it might help reading and math. It's based on one study, which all the gains were by 3 kids, you know, done in, 1968 or something like that. Study music. Music is going to help. This has been a big deal in the American press. You look at the data really, really hard. There is a small, tiny effect that you really have to look hard to find in several sub-conditions. It's barely there. In passing, buried in nearly in a footnote, by the way, the better readers were the ones who had more books in their home, and that was much stronger. So we're willing to consider nearly everything. We do this here in Korea. It's happening all through Asia. We're very eager to take the craziest things to help kids learn English. We haven't considered the obvious. For a fraction of what we are investing all through Asia in English villages, just think how many books we can make available to every child in the country. Thank you very much.